have Hilary from Optimistic Productions. And let me, had all this time, I could have got it up. So Hilary, she's an artist working across multiple methods of thinking through making to create and invite others into joyful, anarchic visions of possibility. Together with Dan Edelstyn, she is co-founder and director of Optimistic Productions. She makes films and performances, and I think she's going to talk about the bank job and the power station. Yeah. So I'm really looking forward. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Oh, great. Thanks for having me. So yeah, that was interesting. The optimism thing. We're optimistic, so we're constantly trying to find ways of sustaining our practice, which is, as well, it says up there, but we're artists and filmmakers, so kind of makers of visions and tellers of stories, and particularly looking at the structures of enchantment that we see, that we live within and that control us, and going behind the scenes, finding ways of intervening, and often like having kind of real world impact through the work that we do that's very grounded in specific places, but with the ambitions for kind of national and global reach. So the first project is a bank job. And that was really our aim of trying to tell a story about an unjust economic system, and specifically about debt. And a way of framing that could become something that was an act of public education, but also a kind of rallying cry to look differently at our money system and all of these ideas that often seem so kind of beyond everyday comprehension. Sorry, I can hear myself, but am I just... Okay, cool. So this began really by a deep dive into an economic education, going to meet Strike Debt in America, who are an offshoot of Occupy Wall Street. And Andrew Ross is the author of Creditocracy and the Case for Debt Refusal. So the central premise here was that we are living in a creditocracy, where the public goods are being eroded by a creditor class that's wrapping debt around all of our basic needs. So this group in America had been buying up debt for pennies in the pound and just destroying it, as a kind of way of a lightning rod into exposing this unjust system. And we thought that would be a good way into this topic if we could try and bring what they did over there back to the UK and use that as a kind of central part of a story that exposed unjust kind of system that wasn't working for the many. So we kind of felt that we had to take these kind of highfalutin concepts and ground them in a specific place. And that specific place is our home place in Waltham Forest in northeast London, and started to talk to people there about, are we living in a creditocracy? You know, how is debt affecting you? Or what are the impacts of years of austerity on our home? And it was pretty evident that, you know, we were in a creditocracy. And it was still quite a struggle to talk to people when you're talking about debt. It's still something of a taboo and not exactly riveting conversation topic. So it was only when kind of finding out more about the economic system and debt and the other side of money creation that the framing of it as a bank job really kind of inspired more involvement from the community. And we decided that if we wanted to do what Strike Debt had done in America, buying up debt for pennies in the pound, we need to raise a lot of money. And to do that, we might as well give ourselves the power of central banks and print money. So we got hold of a bank. So this is a former cooperative bank on the High Street in Walthamstow, labelled it bank. And actually we called ourselves Hoe Street Central Bank, so HSCB. And our logo was quite similar to the other HSBC. It was always very confusing. But and we basically decided that we'd print money and we'd sell it as artwork. So it didn't operate as a local currency, but it did kind of act as a form
Recording stopped.
Building community.
Recording in progress.
Building is like, that's enough of that. A form of building community wealth. So we purposely did it all very publicly and using very tactile means, recruited a team of local people to print the money, kind of made it quite a theatrical, more of a 1940s bank than a contemporary bank, and invited people in to kind of start to print the money. And our money, instead of featuring the Queen and famous people from British history, featured people that we'd met and been talking to locally that were at the front line of fighting kind of austerity. So there's Gary from the food bank on the Garys, and Syra and her family at Homeless Kitchen, and Steve and Josh at a youth project, and Tracy, who was a local primary school teacher. So the kind of act of inviting people to be kind of figureheads of this kind of resistance to an alternative financial vision was quite a step for them, like particularly their head teacher, to kind of stand up and be very visible as money, basically. And people, it was kind of amazing because people came in, and all of these ideas that are so conceptual started to become more tangible because we were printing in public, and the smell of the ink, and using like letterpress, foil blocking, screen printing, teaching people how to do it, and at the same time building this high street space as a kind of space of alternative economic education. And for us, it was good because we were making a film, and often when you're working as independent filmmakers, it's quite hard to be taken seriously by any economists. We're like, hello, we're kind of anything but siloed. We're kind of diving into these new worlds and eager to learn, but people are quite resistant to speak. But having a space like that, we could invite David Graeber and Pettifor. Eventually came these key thinkers that were our inspirations, then also got something out about coming into these very local, kind of diverse spaces. So we kind of held these public events where we brought the local and global kind of thinkings around debt and economics together. And we didn't really know what was happening because we knew we had to raise money from selling these banknotes, and it was kind of quite quiet at the bank at times. But a Guardian article came out, and we managed to sell the banknotes all across the world, strangely. And that allowed us to raise £40,000. We had to exchange it for like more boring money that enabled us to buy up and cancel £1.2 million of local predatory debt. And that was a whole kind of palaver of regulations and finding people in the debt buying industries that would do that for us. And yeah, it was all very dry, and it's all on spreadsheets, and it's all quite invisible. And the point of projects like this was that we want to make this very public. We want this to be an act of provocation and education. So it felt we had our eyes on the towers of finance, Canary Wharf, and the idea that we would actually literally explode the debt in front of them. So that was the aim. But for that, we also needed to raise more money. And all the while, we're kind of building a local and national community. But we started to kind of play around again with financial instruments and issue our own bonds. Again, they were literally artworks for sale. But when people bought them, the promise on the bond, and again, they were printed in the bank by a team of people, was that anyone supporting this debt explosion would get a piece of that explosion. And all of these bonds, this money, it's built on trust and responsibility. And that was quite a big responsibility, seeing as we hadn't quite pulled off how we were going to do the explosion. But the kind of team of people, nationally who were helping pull this off were behind it. And we ended up getting the golden debt in transit van and exploding it so in front of the towers of Canary Wharf, which has its own story of almost not happening, because it was suddenly on a site that has so many filmed explosions and gunfights. And, they suddenly, when we got permission too easily, it was just like, sure. But then when they found out that our film had a message, I don't know what films don't have some kind of story or message, then they said it was a public demonstration, and the Canary Wharf PLC kind of set the Metropolitan Police teams on us, but we managed to do it. But quite compromised in terms of who we could bring there, because everyone who'd bought a bond wanted to come to see the explosion, and we had to stand quite far away. But And then the bank became bang, and we had to fulfill our promise on the bonds so that everyone got a piece of the explosion. So people were getting coins and ingots made of the melted down engine aluminium parts. And that was their packaging. And then some others made out of the windows. So we're obviously referencing the Italian job. So trying to bring mischief and kind of humor to some of these subjects which are purposefully complex, or like something that people don't feel like they are allowed to contribute to discussions around. And we made a feature film, but that launched into lockdown. But that was actually, in a way, a kind of asset, because we had to find ways of meeting our audiences and communities beyond gatekeepers and even beyond like traditional methods of distribution. So that kind of began a way of us building an online audience. We were selling tickets to online screenings. And that was something that we're carrying on with in a way that we know that with the collapse of kind of funding mechanisms and funding taps, which were never on in the first place, drying up, you have to find ways of continuing this kind of work and being supported by the community that wants to see change happen. So the kind of project goes out into the world in the forms of a film, a book, even the van kind of is appearing in kind of more quite staid institutions like the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge. And so there's all the ways that something that starts so hyper-local can try and creep into different kind of spheres of study. But what we really hope to get out of it did feel like the powers of speculative finance that we challenged in that explosion came back to get us in our quest to like actually secure a space on the high street where these kind of ideas could consistently be discussed and new alternatives built. But so we tried to keep the bank. We didn't just want to get it, we wanted to keep it, but we ended up having to take down all of our signs in the end and say goodbye. But the journey towards trying to buy that bank kind of was a deep dive into learning about forms of cooperative buying power, like community share offers. We couldn't do it on this site in the end. It got sold from under us, but the kind of germs of ideas of how we might move forward with that kind of carry on. But we came out of the bank and I ended up on it was lockdown. So it was kind of good we didn't have a big building to like operate from as soon as lockdown came. But we were kind of stuck back on a typical Victorian terrace, wondering what we could do next with all of this new knowledge and the kind of feeling that we needed to build something else. And that's what Power Station, our current project is. I suppose all of them are kind of imagining yourselves to have the power of central governments, of central banks, of like what kind of infrastructure and world do we want to build if we can imagine it, and then trying our best to demonstrate that in microcosm. So the idea of the Power Station came from kind of looking at the street where we lived again, and all of the ideas from Bank Job were percolating through. So particularly from Anne Pettifor, this phrase jumped out from her book, The Case for the Green New Deal, that could every building be a power station, and kind of applying that to a street. What would that mean? I mean, yes, could every building be a renewable power station, but how can we do that at street level? And what is power in this sense of people power? So we started mapping the street. We're talking to our neighbours about if they would get involved. It actually started in a WhatsApp group, though, which was quite interesting. When those WhatsApp groups kind of demonstrated that power of collective action and these new connections that were forming and that sense of possibility that COVID times were bringing. And that phrase, the drama is on the doorstep, comes from one of the founding fathers of British documentary, Grierson, who it's kind of our mantra as well, that we don't have to go searching for the drama. We can find it and make it where we live and kind of dig where we stand. So it was this slower process than normal, but it was helpful to have that kind of bold idea and bold font that followed the polling station font to kind of get people to start to make miniature stands of their own and put this poster up in the window. And again, like the money, it's almost like an act of faith and trust that once you get people to put up a poster that's quite enigmatic, really, it's like, what the hell is the power station and how are we going to pull that off? But when you make these public promises, then more and more people kind of want to come along for the ride with you and learn together in making, just feeling empowered, I think. So we felt like we needed to print some more money because why not? I think we were kind of phasing out of bank jobs. So we again printed money, but this time our currency was called the greenback. And the promise on this note was that if they were sold as artworks, they'd be 50% would be used for physical infrastructure, solar panels, heat pumps, whatever we would need, but 50% would be fueling community wealth. And so rather than having individuals on the banknotes, we now had whole community groups and cooperatives and food growing organizations and all these people that if you are going to have a Green New Deal or a just transition, that no one is left behind, that everyone is involved in building it. So they were the kind of design manifestation of those ideas. But with this, we felt we need scale. It wasn't enough to just like sell our money, basically. And so we've been developing ways of sharing learning that kind of are web-based, that build a community out beyond the local to the national. And it's kind of functions a bit like Patreon in that people are members of the power station. They support us financially or not, but they're all kind of on this learning journey with us. But the few ones that the substantial few that do support financially are our kind of bedrock that allow projects like this to keep going. But even that's not enough. So we resorted to sleeping on the rooftop as a kind of public act of saying we will not come down from this roof until we raise enough money to put our power station on the rooftops. And that was attached to, I just pop in that because those towers of finance are always looming over us and just making us aware of the scale that we're looking for, kind of money that seems such a lot in art circles or even kind of left circles is like just a tiny amount compared to that channeled through these kind of global finances. But, it wasn't that tiny. And we managed through sleeping on the roof and the crowdfunder platform and the match funding that's available on that platform to raise the money to install solar on 16 houses. And then we sang a song that went for Christmas #1 with the school and raised the money for the school. So we were on this crowdfunding roll. And then we're filming everything as we go. So it's just kind of building an audience, because the only way that you can raise money to grow these projects is by building the audience and the community that want to see change happen. So that quote is always one I return to, that the power of art is subversive rather than authoritarian, lying in its connection of the ability to make with the ability to see, and then the power to make others see that they too can make something of what they see, and so on. So it really is a kind of contagious, collaborative, kind of continued learning journey where we want to see not just our street, we start in microcosm, but the way that our film now travels, we want to see every street a power station. There's my brain. And how that travels out nationally and what is the spark or the trigger that can make that happen. But what turns a project like this from being a provocation into a blueprint, and what levers do you need to move to make that happen? Because right now we're in the edit, and the only way we could get to a feature film edit stage was by issuing bonds. So now, before we were playing around with bonds, and now we literally have issued bonds. So we know that we've actually now incurred a lot of debt on the project, but we know that we're good for that promise that when the film releases, people get paid back. So I suppose it's all about imagining different forms of infrastructure and really sharing a vision of abundance that seems in short supply, because it's kind of this poly crisis that we face. The biggest part of it seems to be this crisis of imagination. And so the role of artists and storytellers is kind of key within that whole ecosystem of solutions to be found. So thank you.